Michael with United Veterans Worldwide for an exciting interview today with Paul and Amy. I met them recently at church and learned very quickly that Paul has had an extensive career in the military, which with it comes many stories and experiences. And I've also heard that Amy has had her own experiences as the spouse of someone in the military who would also offer great insight to this channel and to all the viewers today. So please tune in and give your attention to Paul and Amy. So I'll turn some time over to you to introduce yourselves and who you are and what you are.
Okay. My name is Paul Waldron. I'm actually still serving as in the Army Reserve. So that's, I guess that's all I've got to say. I joined in 1993. I enlisted. I was in my last semester at BYU. And I thought, I'm going to go to law school. And they say when I was supposed to work, but one was patriotism. I always thought it just seemed like the right time. And I kind of felt that that's something I should do. The logical reason was I'm supposed to work during the first year of law school. If I'm enlisted, they can't tell me not to go on a drill weekend. But that really wasn't a motivator. I was just out there. We were only married for 6 months when I did that.
Oh, wow.
And she knew about it, but she felt like I conned her. Is that fair?
I'm Amy. We've been married for 32 years now.
Congrats.
Yeah.
Yes.
So we've been married longer than I've been married, that's for sure. By 6 months.
He's a delightful man. My own father served in World War II.
Mm-hmm.
I was not around at that time. He was 18 and in Britain and France.
Mm-hmm.
In the Army Air Corps. So that was a service that I always knew. It was a part of my experience, even though I wasn't born until many years after that. And my father also worked for the State Department, which had a lot of connection with, obviously, the military. And let's see, we met on the ballroom dance team at BYU.
Brigham Young University.
During our undergrad, and got married 2 months after I graduated, and he had 1 more year for his undergrad, and then after that we went to law school together. And I should say, after that he went to basic training.
Yes.
And got home from basic training. Was it a week?
Like 10 days before school started.
Like 10 days before law school began.
Oh my goodness.
So he was all cue-headed.
Cue ball. The short fuzz.
Mm-hmm.
I did basic training at Fort Leonard Wood, was OSA, one station in training, went right into to be a combat engineer. I was 12 Bravo was the designator. I was that for 5.5 years, even though really for about the last 3.5 of those, the Utah National Guard State Office of the Judge Advocate General learned I was in law school, and they just grabbed me and said, "You're going to play with us."
Yeah.
So I did that, and then a couple of years after I had graduated, then I was able to direct commission in as a judge advocate. So then I spent my first 13 years in the artillery. As the judge advocate with 1st Corps Artillery that later became the 65th Fires Brigade. I got to do a lot of fun things with them. We do exercises, and yes, I did the JAG stuff, but I also got to I was like a movement control officer. I got to do a battery command, a headquarters battery command while I was a captain. So that was fun. My NCO said that was the best command they'd ever enjoyed being commanders of.
Awesome. Awesome.
We know who ran the show.
Right.
My folks. And then I went over to the aviation group with Apaches, Blackhawks, Lakotas, and they had a C-12. So I was the JAG for that group for a few years. And then I went over to trial defense. And I did that for 2 or 3 years. That was exciting. I was supervising guys in 6 states, so I travel once a year. Kind of go to, Montana, Idaho, Oregon, Washington, and Alaska. I got to do that for a couple times, and then after that, I got an opportunity to switch from the Guard to the Reserve, and I skipped right over my deployment, didn't I? So when I was in the artillery, they spliced off all the leadership, basically all the senior, all the officers and senior NCOs, and they turned us into what they called embedded team trainers, or ETTs, to the Afghan National Security Forces. That was in 2006, 2007. In 2006, when I left, we had our last child was 1 year old of 5 children. So we had children from 1 to 11. And that's why Amy had it hard, right? I mean, when we go and deploy, we have our brothers there with us, right?
Yeah.
And Uncle takes care of us. Okay, here's your food. Here's where we're going to sleep. Amy, sadly, I was in the country 1 month, and her shoulder went out, rose up, and she was moving her dad from his house into an apartment, and she had to get soldier surgery, and that meant she didn't have the use of an arm with the nursing baby, and that was rough for her and the kids. I found out years later when I interviewed my kids for Veterans Day thing once. I mean, I learned, my son said, I learned not to have feelings. And my daughter, just younger than him, said, I was sad and crying when I left, that the airfield where you were taking off to leave, and I didn't know why. And of course, my youngest, she was 5. Our youngest was 1. No, she wasn't 5. That was.
Lizzie was okay.
I was talking about him. Yeah, and then the 1-year-old, of course, she reached up to and said, "Daddy," to everybody that was around.
Yeah.
So that's.
She knew 2 words when you left.
Uh-huh.
She just turned 1, like 2 weeks before. We left June 6th.
Yeah.
Which is
2 weeks before.
Yeah. So 2 weeks before that, she turned 1, and she could say 2 words. She said, "Dada" and "uh-oh." So half of her vocabulary was gone.
Yeah.
Brutal.
When Daddy left, and when he got home, she was 2.5, and of course she had a full vocabulary and was running around and all the things. Sometimes I still do see a child between the age of 1 and 2.5 and think that's the stuff that Paul missed.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, those are tough moments. I left for Iraq, and 3 weeks later, my son was born, and he was my 3rd child. So I left 2 little girls behind, and I didn't meet my son until he was about 9 months old when I came home for R&R. And I came home a different person. He didn't know me from anybody. So I know those emotions that are there. And for Amy, my wife had 3 kids while I was deployed for that year, and I really didn't send home a lot of information about what I was going through. I kept it pretty relaxed. I even kept a journal for that full year, and I went back to see those traumatic incidents, and I didn't record anything. I said, "Wow, today was a tough day." Boom, that's it, right? Like that was my entry. So yeah, the family bears the brunt of the deployments, and and to be frank and honest with our global audience today, most families don't survive a military career where there's constant deployments. It's very difficult for the spouse who stays behind to carry the load of all of the requirements and raising children, not to mention the concern and worry for the spouse abroad. But here's an example of people who have been married for 30-odd years who survived. And so one of the questions I'll ask at the end for you both is to figure out how and why, how you survived.
Well, to be clear, what you just said was many families that have constant deployments do not make it. We have not had constant deployment. He was deployed to Afghanistan. He was deployed to Colorado Springs.
Mobilized.
Yep.
I would call it.
Sorry,
Yeah.
Colorado Springs for 2 months for a specific thing. I will say that was how many years after Afghanistan?
5.
5 years after Afghanistan, and it was traumatic. It was more traumatic than I would have thought.
Yeah.
And the Colorado Springs is not far from here, and is a great sight difference than Kandahar Air Base, and yet it felt like Kandahar.
Yeah.
And a year and a half. That was a fascinating, emotional.
And Michael, you really brought up a good point. It's not just constant deployments, as Amy said. When we came home, I looked at the guy who'd actually been my senior NCO when I was a battery commander. Now I'm a senior major. He's a sergeant major, and I said, "Yeah, everybody asks. Everybody says, hey, what's different?" We all tell everybody nothing's different, and then we looked at each other and said, "Yeah, everything's different."
Yep.
Between us, yeah, everything's different. And
yeah.
He was one of the ones of many that got divorced when he got back. So we're talking about civilian soldiers, right, that have had the one deployment and the divorce. I'm a divorce lawyer, so I would see, I was and keeping track that, morale is part of the job of the JAG anyway, keeping track of what's going on with the troopies, and I'd say a good 50%, that's probably right up there with the regular stat, 50% of the marriages didn't survive that.
Yeah.
You had spouses that cheated, you have guys that come home with anger issues, you have guys that, I didn't have PTSD, but it did have an impact, right? I came home and made some financial decisions that were not in the best interest of my family, because, I was part of a business enterprise, and, hey, you do everything for the team, and that wasn't a good choice. Amy's the one that really has been the most, if you were to say PTSD, it would be, she's the one that really has had, because it was tough for her,
Yeah.
5 kids, and luckily she didn't have to worry about income, but she had more than a full-time job. So.
Yeah, you both are attorneys, right?
Be there to help, right?
Yeah, you both are attorneys. Yeah. So, yeah, definitely a full-time job, and not a job that's, it's a stressful job at times, right? And lots of workload. So, Amy, tell me about your experience when he deployed, when you're staying back as a single mom, taking care of kids and trying to still run the household and everything else.
I'm going to try and not be emotional. I will pay for this interview in Locked Lake tonight. So I hope it's helpful.
Amy, emotions are free game on this channel.
I just am so impressed by the heroes like my husband who have served, and to try and bring some level of peace and hope to so many parts of the world. And I am very grateful to have served him well. And
100%.
My children, I have in the last 18 years, have tried to reiterate to my children that they also have performed service, because they were amazing. I had an 11-year-old and a 9-year-old, and a 7-year-old and a 5-year-old and a 1-year-old. And so I do remember it was my 7-year-old's birthday when Paul and I was in the car driving for some last minute preparations for her party turning 7. When Paul called me and said we're a go for Afghanistan, and I'll be leaving at the beginning of June. I do remember that first thing that went through my mind was that I couldn't breathe. I had to remind myself to breathe, and after I had done that, my next thought was, how am I going to do this? Besides my children, my mother was had been having cluster strokes for a number of years, and physically and mentally, and was leaving us. And my father, who was at that time 80, oh my gosh, how old is he now? He's better at that. So it was very vulnerable.
83, yeah.
He was 83.
84, 83.
And she had lost memory of who we were and could not walk on her own and could not, all of those things. And I have one sister who's very supportive, but she lived in Indiana. And so myself with my 5 children and both of my parents, who normally would have been extremely supportive, but I obviously was the caregiver for them at that point, rather than asking them to help with me. So
That helped. I mean, but you were his emotional support.
he helped because he was a dear and delightful man, and his grandchildren loved him. He was, and I would call him when I had one child in particular, my 5-year-old at the time, who her love language was nuzzling, cuddling, and I, because my children were now right on cue, could not. I would hold my arm like this. It was for months, and just could not be touched. And so when my Lizzie would get too anxious and I knew she needed some cuddle time, I would call my dad and say, could you come over and sit and watch a movie with Lizzie? And she would just drape herself all over him for a couple of hours, and that would ground her.
Wonderful.
So I will say that with the 5 children, I went to, well, my arms had been sore for a while, my shoulder, and it was a rotator cuff thing. But
There were like 3 things that obviously been going on. She had a calcified spur going through one thing, and it was like the guy laughed when he looked at the dog laughed. It's like, this did not just happen.
he did, but
I can relate to that because I had my right shoulder replaced because of some injuries I sustained, and before it was replaced, talk about spurs everywhere. So wasn't sleeping, constant chronic pain. I know, I can relate.
it did feel very much. I have a friend who said, Amy, the timing of your shoulder going completely out, which happened about 2 weeks after he left, at the beginning of the summer, and suddenly I could not at all. Before it had been sore, and suddenly I just couldn't use it at all. There was no amount of ibuprofen I could take. There was no amount of anything. And gratefully, his brother, who's also in the military, by the way, his brother is 2 years younger than him, who was just a hero for us. And anyway.
Thank goodness.
David was wonderful. So David happened to work for a hand surgeon. So didn't cover the shoulder, but worked in the same office. with orthopedic people. And I called him and I said, okay, Paul's been gone for 2 weeks and the shoulder is gone, I can't use it. And he said, well, let me get you an appointment, I can get you in. And I said, okay, Dave, I can't do it right now because my children are all grieving. They're down. And of course, none of them really in a place they can articulate the grieving.
Correct.
So I had to, I felt as though I needed to be present to observe, and it was changing all the time, their responses emotionally and physically and all of those things, and all at different stages and different ages. And so I said, I simply do not have time to go to the doctor for myself. I don't have time to do anything for myself. So that's going to have to be another time. And I spent the next, it was the summer time, so I got kids in swim team things and all kinds of whatever their activities were going to be, and felt some kind of a pattern with that. And then after that, got them in school. My 5-year-old was starting kindergarten, which is kind of a big deal, right? I had a daughter my oldest was starting in junior high, and then all the way down to the toddler who was still at home. And so it was September by the time I called my brother-in-law back, and I said, I'm ready for an appointment. So having done all of that with my right arm like this, and he said, okay, I'll get you in. And that's when I went in and they took the x-ray, and the doctor laughed at me and said, well, this is, I'm like, well, it's been a while, but now I have some time. And anyway, and we scheduled a time for the surgery. I had all kinds of, I still can't do, there's a PTSD thing for me. I cannot deal with TRICARE. Bless their hearts. But I think the only thing that explains my interaction with TRICARE during that time was that Al Qaeda had infiltrated. It was some kind of psyop thing where they were very effectively making all of the families insane, like completely psychotic.
Yeah.
And I can't even call them now. I'm like, Paul, you've got to call them because they get all.
That's the military health insurance for the members of their family, or a global audience, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Insane. Anyway, so they eventually cover things, but you have to be insane before they cover. It just was the only explanation. So, gosh, I don't know. I'm wandering all over the place, but it was rough. But the children with the grieving, I came to that because I had my mom's first cousin. So she was in her 70s at the time, and she had lost her husband in a freak accident, not military, but he had died when her 4 daughters were at much the same age as my children. And when it is part of my faith that I feel as though God sent me understanding at that time. And one of those was my Aunt Marilyn, who when she called and asked, how are the children doing? The things that I happened to tell her, she said, Amy, that sounds exactly like my daughters when their father had passed away. And I said, well, he's not gone. He is gone, but he's not dead. And,
right.
But it was just the same with the grieving. And so that really plugged me into, okay, what is going on in the children's minds? Again, they could not articulate it. And so I needed to try and figure out what it was and be able to articulate it in many cases to them. Sweetheart, I think what you're feeling now is the following. And wow, they were heroes. But it was rough because now you've got my grandma who's forgetting them, though her body is physically there, Daddy whose body is physically gone, grandpa who is just really struggling, mom who can't use her arm.
Yeah, so we had some wonderful neighbors. There's there's three particular women that were very helpful to Amy, that the youngest, we say, call them, Mama Anna, Mama Kim.
Very cool.
And Mama Wendy.
And nobody taught her to say that. She just saw them as much as she saw me.
Yeah.
And started calling them Mama. Slowly on her own, 1 year old.
One of the unique challenges with reservists and Guard when they deploy is the families continue to exist in their communities where they were previously. But we know in communities most often, you live in your home, you operate your life, and occasional interactions occur. For active duty, when I deployed out of Fort Riley, Kansas, to Iraq in 2008, my wife had our whole neighborhood who was deployed. So she had every woman on the whole block who also husbands were gone and had children, and they formed a community that was life-saving for my wife. And hopefully veterans around the globe who have deployed in harm's way, families have been supported in different ways. And I'm glad that you had some people who reached out. Now, Amy, you said your dad served during World War II. Did he ever share experiences with you? Did he ever talk about it?
Not a lot, but more than several of his cousins. So again, who is a much older generation than most of my friends' fathers. I had one woman who once argued with me, that wasn't your father, it was your grandfather. I mean, no, I promise. It was my daddy. I know. He was 45 when I was born, and so he was an older father, and was very close with all of his cousins, all from the South, Arkansas, Missouri. And whenever we would go there, I still remember a time, it was the 4th of July, and we were at Mavis and Shirley's house. Shirley had been...
he was a paratrooper. He'd gone in on like D-Day. He parachuted in on D-Day. So
this my dad's first cousin, was that whole generation for him. And we were at their lake house, Mavis and his wife Mavis, and Shirley had a wonderful lake house in Hot Springs, Arkansas, for anyone who knows. Fantastic. And 4th of July, we're having the ribs, and then going out on the boat for some water skiing and coming back. Paul, and I've known Mavis and Shirley my whole life, they had not had any children, and so no one to really talk with about these things. And Paul started asking him questions about his service. And he said that the whole 4th of July afternoon we sat in that lake house, and he talked about his service, and he said, I have not, this would have been in 1995. And he said, I have not spoken of these things.
For like 45, 50 years.
Yeah.
And it may have been the only time he ever spoke of them. Because again, if you don't have children or you don't have people who are asking you, my sister and I would say to Dad, hey,
I wasn't just quizzing him, because, you got to butter him up a little, right? Like, talking about my experience of basic training and my little bit of military experience, but it's enough to get that common ground.
Yeah.
And then you can kind of lead that, just like you can do. In spades you can do, Michael.
Yeah. Because
of your experience in years. But, that was... Yeah, he in fact, he mentioned they dropped in. Of course, the Germans are shooting them while they're coming down, right?
Yeah.
So they're like gathering up their stuff, and he and a couple guys are sitting on this rock, and all of a sudden he hears some gunfire going off. He does a back roll off the rock, and the two guys next to him both got hit.
Oh my goodness.
And that's the kind of, boom, you saw it right there.
Yeah.
Yeah. He surely, man, he just, this is the way it was, And Dad was D+17 with the airfield over in France, and Dad's soft. Dad was such a softie, but because he just choke up, started talking, because he talked about the airplanes. He was a bomb loader, right? He was an ordnance guy, and that's how he got to be a buck sergeant right up, age 19, telling old guys what to do, but he was a bomb loader, and he said, then you'd have planes going out, and not all of them are coming back, and that was, he just, that's about as much as he would ever say. We have a picture of him, where he dug his foxhole. Yeah.
He would not take us camping any time in our whole lives. Hey, Dad, let's go camping. Our friends are going camping. He said, I had enough of that in France.
It was too triggering for him, or?
Absolutely.
Well,
that's all he would say. The conversation was over. My dad was a chatty and a soft and a gentle, but boy, it was, yeah. In fact, there was one time, how about this for a trigger? One time I remember, and again, so soft and gentle. He was retired by the time I was from State Department by the time I was in high school, and we lived in Northern California. And one day I had bought a sweater. It must have been the deepest, darkest winter, right, in the Bay Area. And I bought a sweater. I was wearing a sweater to school. I came in to say, see you later, Dad. The sweater happened to be, you're wearing the color, happened to be olive green.
Drab, yeah.
Olive drab. I hadn't thought anything of it. I came in to give my dad a hug, say, see you later, Dad. And he said, where did you get that sweater? And I said, well, I just got it. Do you like it? And he said, you need to take that off. And I'm like, well, what's going on with you, Dad?
Yeah.
And he said, that color, I can't do that color.
Well, because he's colorblind. And he had plenty of clothes for that color. he wouldn't let her wear it.
But there was something about the material, the color, whatever, the shade, that triggered a memory that said, I've seen that. I may have seen it in bad scenarios. We don't want to have that memory linger in this house.
Again, that would have been in the 80s.
Wow.
And he got out in 45.
Right.
In 45 after.
So that would have been, 40 years later?
Yeah. And again, not the dad to be telling me what to wear and what not to wear. He just was not that dad. He was the dad that was, you're so beautiful, dear. Oh, how intelligent you are. These are the
wonderful.
The voice of my father, when it comes, he's been gone for a number of years, and when the voice of my father comes to me, it's always in those, always complimentary. Be careful. Yeah. You gotta be careful.
I'm not a psychiatrist or psychologist, but there's something about an entire generation that goes to war. Every neighbor had somebody gone. And it's hard to feel sorry for yourself when everybody's experiencing the same amount of trauma. And obviously there was a large number that didn't come home. And that's not just talking U.S., we're talking globally. People lost people everywhere. So when the war's over and things are starting to go back to what I would consider normal, the new normal, people didn't talk about it. Why? Because everybody around you had the same type of experience and you just don't talk about it. Fast forward to the experiences that we had. And Paul, you deployed to Afghanistan, and I never was in Afghanistan. I did Iraq and I did Africa multiple times. But Afghanistan was a unique place. One, because many, many conquering armies had already been there to fight and had lost and had abandoned, and now we're there for 20-something years. And if you're on an embedded training team, right, you're working closely with people whose loyalty is obviously for a new government, for democracy, or so to speak.
Not really.
Not really? Oh.
Not really.
Well, tell me then, please. Yeah.
They're tribal. Who's paying them the money today? That's who they're loyal to.
Yeah.
But they're very tribal. That there's, what are there, 18 tribes? There's over 40 or over 30 languages that are official in the country.
Yeah.
It's a pretty rugged terrain. It's gorgeous. The Hindu Kush, those are a tall set of mountains. They looked tall and they were miles away, But even from the college standpoint, but I'm trying to remember that I was out at. I did a lot of travel in the southern region of the country, helping with the training, and I remember I was in one place, and there's this castle, like a castle type structure that they were using, that had been built in the time of Alexander the Great. It's mud, right? And it was built up mud, whatever, adobe, whatever it was.
Yeah.
But my understanding is, and that was in southern Afghanistan. It wasn't right on the border with Pakistan, like Spin Bulldog. But it was some other place. And they said, this is pretty much what Alexander said. Yeah, we're not going to go any further than that. In other words, he didn't push it in the country. Because, that's what they call it, the meat grinder of armies, is Afghanistan.
Yeah.
So you're saying Alexander the Great got to that point and said,
we're good. We're not going to go any further into the country. Because, the meat grinder of armies, right?
Yeah.
Over history. So very tribal. You never knew. So at that time when I was there, it was the wild, wild west. Okay. The surge had not happened. It was being called the Forgotten War at the time because, there was such a focus on Iraq, right? And so they were calling it the Forgotten War. We had a video guy, a journalist there that was basically, that was the theme of his what he was putting together. And so I had an interpreter. So I had a few jobs.
Okay. It took 4 men to replace him when he left.
Well, maybe because I'm qualified or something. I don't even know. But anyway, I did collect jobs because I get done with the one and then say, okay, what can I help next? So I was, obviously I was the brigade JAG for the U.S. forces. So I really didn't have to do a lot with that, unfortunately. I was the better trainer to the Afghan forces as a legal trainer, right? So I would train not only their lawyers and their judges and their defense counsel, I would train the foot soldiers on these are your legal rights, this is the way your military law works. I would train commanders, officers, so all of them, we would talk about that stuff, and it's hard. Uniform Code Military Justice. And I'd be out at some outpost getting like all these smelly Afghan soldiers in a room and saying, okay, here's your rights. They go, wait a minute, but where's my boots? And I'm like, well, okay, I get that that's one of your rights, but that's not the kind of rights we're talking about. No, but where are my boots? And I said, well, honestly, they're probably in a bazaar somewhere in Kabul being sold by the logistics general officer for the Afghan Army.
Yeah.
It's probably where your boots are.
That's not far from the truth. Yeah.
That's true. And I just said, but for example, they're not allowed. Like one of the favorite discipline things was the leader, whether it was an senior NCO or officer, would take a pistol belt, they'd whip the guys, then throw them into a storage container and shut the door. And I'm like, okay, can't do that. That's not okay. Anyway, so we were doing that piece, and then what grew from there was a CERT. Did you guys have CERT? This CERT, Commander's Emergency Response Units CERT. It was funds. They had money to pay for.
Oh! Of course.
Yeah, and we had that over in Iraq too, right?
Yep.
So we were.
A lot of soldiers got in trouble because they were given all this money, and they were like, "Do I hand off $40,000 or $100,000 to this guy who's not even going to share it with the guys we're having guard our bases?" No, and they kept it and got in trouble. Yeah.
Well, soldiers got in trouble too. I remember I heard about a colonel that was over in one of those theaters, and he got busted for keeping. He says, "Come on, that was just budget." Yes. Well, okay, but you don't do that. Anyway,
Yep.
So yeah, so we then started putting these things together, whether we were rehabilitating their irrigation systems called Perez's, building schools. They were really probably used as mosques, but building schools, getting them wheat to plant instead of poppy seed or marijuana. I remember once I was on a convoy down headed south to Pakistan, and you go on corn, marijuana, corn, marijuana. Anyway, and I know guys, real hero guys that were always out in the furthest parts as infantry trainers, where they'd use their Humvees to run over poppy fields, and so, they'd get mad, the farmers get mad, why are you doing this? And you're not supposed to be growing poppy. But then he got them seed, treated seed, by the way, to one, keep it from being eaten by rodents, but also to keep the people from eating it, so they'd actually plant it and put it in the ground. And so we did those kinds of projects. That particular hero I'm talking about, really something of a guy. He's the one I really need to hook you up with.
Yeah, that'd be great.
I heard he started to talk about it. His name's, well, I'll get in touch with you, but he got a Bronze Star with Valor. Should have been a Silver Star for some stuff he did. But that's on the one side. On the other side, he's put together over $2 million worth of projects. I mean, he was just great. So that's the stuff I was doing there. I think. Oh, and I worked with the Cultural Affairs officer, and I was a liaison to. I was on CAF, on Kandahar Airfield, so we had big three were the U.S. Well, I said there was the three, and then the U.S. So you had the Brits, the Dutch, and no, they were there too. We had all kinds of nationalities, but Canadians.
The Canadians were there at the same time, yeah.
Yeah, Canadians took the beating while I was there.
Yep.
We'd have the ramp ceremonies, and the Canadians were the guys that seemed to be more than anything. It was Canadians that were getting killed.
I've been interviewing a lot of them and guys who were there at that exact same time, and they lost a lot of troops.
They did.
Very sad.
Very sad. Canadians were great. Dutch were fine. They only came for 6 months at a time, but okay. the Brits were good to work with too, and we had them in our little headquarters helping. So it's always a joint little part. We were just a sub part of what was everything else that was going on in the base office. So 10 to 12,000 NATO troops. We had Germans and Croats and Romanians and Polish, and you had some Arabs. I don't remember which country they're from. I'm not going to defame them because I can't remember.
Yeah.
They got kicked off the base for apparently sexually assaulting an American female soldier or something. So it was interesting there. But so that was while I was there. I had an interpreter. So I had while I was there, the Afghan army they used Toyota. No, they were Ford Rangers built in Thailand, and they used diesel gas. I've been able to finagle to get one of them to use for my own running around at CAF or over within the bigger wire was the Afghan Corps base, 205th Corps base, and so I'd go over there every day and meet with their legal officer and whatever we were doing. I had an interpreter. I was blessed, frankly. I mean, normally they just said, "Here's your interpreter, here you go," and I'm like, "Okay," but they didn't do that. The guy in charge of the interpreters came, got me, and said, "Hey, I got 5 interpreters, and you want to interview them and choose one?" And I said, "Got it, good." So I got him into a bee hut, right? The plywood little shed, brutally. And I sat him down and I started talking to him to try and get a feel for their proficiency in English, their attitudes. And then the guy stuck his head in and said, "I need one." And I said, "Okay, you're gone." And I picked mine. And he's still my brother today.
I love it.
I didn't get to help him get his U.S. citizenship. He was so good that I had been influential in getting him transferred up to Kabul from Kandahar. He was very good. And he ended up coming here and living with us for a few months, and he was setting up his his residency, as it were. But he kept going back, working as a contract interpreter. And there's another interpreter that I didn't really know very well there, but I got to know him here. He came and lived with us, and him and his family now live in the Houston area. They were able to get out before they were getting 2000. What was it? Labor Day 20. When did
when was the pullout?
Afghanistan fall? Yeah,
I think it was 22 or 21 or something.
No, it was 2020 or 2021.
So when that happened, my real the one that I worked with that was closest with and really like a brother to me. He was he's an American citizen now. He owned a few restaurants. In fact, I just think he still owns those restaurants in Kabul. I don't know how he deals with the Taliban there. I probably should say more about that, other than to say that all was going down, and I'm getting text messages from him saying, "Okay, what am I supposed to do now?"
15 August 2021.
There you go. And I'm like, "Well, I mean, what about this and that?" And he's like, "Okay, I just moved to here," and then all of a sudden, I'm now trying to help him move throughout the city of Kabul to try and get to the airport.
We were in church.
Yeah, we were in church. I mean, Sunday school, texting, getting messages and texting.
And he'd get another message, and his name would be, I'm hiding. This is where I'm hiding. This is where my family, my wife and my mother and my young children are. I can hear this amount of gunshots. Should I come out? And then we were in church that whole time, and he was
Sitting there texting.
guiding Azim through Kabul.
And he ended up doing what he wanted anyway. But they got at him.
Wow.
So his wife and 3 kids live in
Southern California.
Southern California, and
Where she has family. Her father had been the VOA Voice of America for years, and in Afghanistan, northern Afghanistan,
and in
Pakistan.
Anyway, yeah. So I still have that connection, right?
Yeah.
I don't know your connection with your Iraqi comrades or I tried that legal advisor, they called it the Afghan colonel I worked with. I was trying to help get him.
You did all kinds of work. It wasn't just Azim. After Azim and his family got out, then you were working with.
I need to get you in touch with him and interview her.
That'd be great.
She's a civilian. She's a civilian, but she married an Afghan intelligence officer, general officer, and she's got her master's in international relations.
So the two of them.
So she's been. Yeah, I was actually paying her in 2021. I was paying her for my law firm. I'd say, yeah, okay, don't worry about the law work. Keep doing the work you're doing, trying to help get people out and stuff. Her name's Amy. She'd be fantastic to really get her viewpoint. And her husband, Ahmed,
There was a lot of days of no sleep.
They were living in the States when that happened. So she lived clear across the country, was one of my paralegals. But he was at the Afghan embassy through that 2021 period, and they said, you need to come back. And he's like, no way, no.
No.
In like April, May of 2021, no, that's not happening.
No. You may never get out.
Yeah, and the reason he was in the embassy was because he'd already been targeted by, Amy has lived over there with her husband for like 5 years during the times that we would have, after, but during the times the U.S. was, and the Allies were kind of maintaining some semblance of safety and order, but they had a car bomb go off and blow up the front of their house.
Can you imagine?
So, so she's, there was no way they were going back.
But Paul, that was weeks of because he'd work all day doing his law work, and then when it was nighttime, we're 11 and a half hours difference from Kabul. And so then he would be working up phones all night long with connections and friends, and who were trying to navigate, finding a way to get to the airport, all of that.
Yeah, when you first mentioned that you worked in training some of the attorneys, the judges, and setting up those type of systems, my first thought when you said that, Paul, was, oh no. Because I interviewed a woman who's a journalist now. Her name is Beth. About 3.5 weeks ago, you can find her interview on the channel, but she runs a podcast called The Afghan Project. So she served as an intel officer for the civilian side of the army in Kabul, and she gained a lot of knowledge from the locals on how the Taliban's influence was going to be, and she almost foresaw the fact that our political mess in the United States would eventually lead to what would be considered an abandonment in Afghanistan. And so she started early the preparation to get people visas and get them out. And I also got my interpreter out of Iraq, who was there, and he's living in Michigan now. But she did a lot of that work. And when the collapse came and U.S. left and dumped all the equipment there on the airstrip, and she was just getting texts repeatedly that people that she loved and cared for were being executed. And she says, that the media reported the Taliban are in talks with the U.S. They're going to change their system. They're going to make things just. And she said, it is lies. If you know what's happening now in there, it would destroy your innocence to the farthest degree, because that is a brutal terrorist systematic government. It's brutal. And when that collapse happened, it's not like me. I didn't invest a ton of time there. Obviously, I wasn't on the ground there, but I trained units to go over there and lost guys over there. I hit a spiral. I fell into a deep depression for 2 weeks. And my wife says, you know why you're struggling, right? And I said, I freaking have no idea why I'm back in this hole. And it was because I knew that people that we cared about they trusted us. We'd left them to slaughter. And I knew that so many of my friends who did 4, 5, 6, 7 deployments in a matter of 10 years lost best friends for that cause, that ultimately they questioned why at the end. Yeah.
So the us on the ground, right? I mean, we did our best, thought we were doing right. We look at those very questions and it's maddening, right? When I was there, I know it was only a few years after we'd gotten in, right? I said, hey, look, we need to back up. We need to take the pay system back from the Afghan army, because the paymasters are keeping the money and not paying the soldiers.
Yeah. And
the higher-ups said, talk to me on your pay grade. If we do that, the POTUS star chart will retract. We can't have that. Really? Why don't we make it work? I think the legal officer I worked for was a good guy, and it was hard, because I'm getting calls from, through Signal, because it's more secure through the Signal app, and he doesn't speak English other than hello, welcome. But
yeah.
He's got a son that spoke English, and would say, hey, look, man, we've had to move him again because the Taliban's knocking on the doors looking for him. He'd been trained back in the day by the Russians as an artillery officer.
Mm.
And then he looked like, he showed me a picture of himself in Taliban years. He looked like Taliban, even though he worked for NGOs. And then, as soon as boom, someone takes over, so he's going to try and set up a legit government. He stepped forward again. To become, and he was a colonel, artillery officer, very, he knew how to wear a uniform, the whole deal. But then all of a sudden, we're out. And, our good friend, Syed over that's living, in another part of the country here, his brothers were left abandoned. They had worked with special forces. And let's talk about what the interpreters did. Syed got the equivalent of a Bronze Star with V device for dragging Marines in the Helmand province out of the kill zone when he told them, we can't go in there. I've gotten the cue. We can't go over this place. We're going to get whacked. Some guy, a Marine had lost a leg or something. He couldn't get on his back and haul him out of there.
Oh my goodness.
So the Marines gave him a civilian certificate that basically said, ultra bravery and all this stuff. And he's certainly one of those guys that deserve to come here and make a new life.
I agree.
Just a great person. My brother he was like a little American. I loved it. Sometimes I had to borrow an interpreter if I'd let him go on leave to see his mom. He'd grown up orphan because the Russians had killed his dad. His dad was a mujahideen.
No, to be clear, his dad disappeared. They assume
that he was killed.
Still today, how he says it, we assume he's gone, although we have had friends who have come back after many years.
Okay. So anyway, he'd grown up as an orphan, essentially. But, Azim was he just had the good work ethic and all the, I'd have in my truck like a pack of
He had an American soul.
He had an American
entrepreneurial American soul.
Well, he knew how to barter and trade. That's a bit of an athlete part. But things like he'd jump on my truck and I'd say, hey, Azim, I had a hard time getting you up on because they'd give us cell phones with local whatever. I'd say, hey, I couldn't bring you. He said, well, I ran out of minutes. And I said, Azim, you're supposed to tell me he'd run out of minutes so I can give you a card. He says, well, I don't want to bother and pester and beg from you. And whereas, some other Turk would jump in my truck and they'd see I had a pack of gum. Oh, can I have some gum?
Yeah.
Give you a phone card, can you whatever? No, I don't care.
Yeah.
So, anyway, I stopped my career when I was trying to just go back real fast. I stopped the Guard. I went to the reserve to become a deputy commander of illegal operations detachment. I went to another, training division to be their JAG. And now, though, I'm doing a killer job. It's kind of still the reserves, but it's kind of happening between. I'm the emergency preparedness liaison officer to Utah. So helping with defense support to civilian authority and liaison for any homeland defense needs, which unfortunately, at least people are making noise that's becoming more of an issue.
Yep.
So my buddy down from Syed's brothers, they were stuck down there and being hunted by the Taliban because they'd been collaborators, and he lost all faith in the U.S. government, just leaving him behind. I had contacted I think it was at MacDill, right? Where Special Forces, SOCOM, right, was there, and they had some kind of a thing set up where you could call in and give them information. I had copies of passports that we got, information, the ID cards, the whole deal, saying, here's these people, here's how you can get a hold of them, we've got to get them out. Of course, I love did you ever see that meme with the statue of Sun Tzu? And it says, the first rule of combat is to give up your strongest point, or the high point, or the high ground. Sun Tzu. That whole, why we left Bagram, it's totally secure, and we're using the Kia, at the time I was there, it was the Kabul International Airport. Now what was the name of that? was over there. They named that Karzai International. But why we're using that as a place to finish up is, again, mystifies.
Yeah.
Father, totally safe, totally secure, and then we're using that. So I get through Kia, and I get outside the gate of Kia. And I'm telling you, that's not a strong point.
No. Paul, you haven't mentioned the fact that the years that you deployed to Afghanistan were almost the critical years when IED technology was enhanced to 100th times what it was previously, and they started to implement that tactic. You talk about traveling all over the place, but I know you had to have that in the back of your mind every time you traveled.
Most of the time I was in the air, because you can't let the Jag get killed. But I did one time I convoyed from one location to another, and they found a landmine, an old Russian landmine. They even let me do my clicker to get rid of it. But that was that one. I went out on actually a maneuver to engage. I was on a smaller fob, and they said, "Well, sir," because I was the senior ranking guy, major. They said, "Sir, you're going to come with us? What do you say?"
Right.
"Oh, I can't go.
Right.
I'm going to stay here." So they, of course, did a good job of making sure I didn't get in trouble. But we went in, and we'd gone and done a humanitarian thing 2 days before. They caught a Taliban guy, and they had a pretty good idea where they were. So we bypassed that village. We're going, and okay, so let me answer your question. The answer is, we didn't see a lot of that then. I mean, it wasn't sophisticated. We also had, because Iraq was really the proving ground for so much of the technology, the interruption technology. Did you guys have what are those? They look like road graders, but they were there. They go out in front.
Eventually, yes.
Well, we had that in 2007, and we had one of those. I can't remember what those were called, but anyway, bad name. But it was interesting. We had the Afghan army guy. So we had the Romanians, you had the ETTs with the Afghans, and the Afghan guy, they'd always have a guy on a motorcycle go out in front, and he went along this goat. I mean, we're like on a goat trail, kind of, but we were anyway. He went up to a certain point, turned around, and came back. And then when he turned around to go back again, I guess he went right on the right part, and it was the inner tube with the wires. So, and I would happen to be standing. So the road's here, and there's kind of just a slight hill here. I'm at a Humvee standing over here, and I see this motorcycle come flying up. And I heard the boom, and the motorcycle come flying up, and a body going here or there or whatever. And so I was kind of not in the line of but I was right there. I was probably not even 50 meters away, but I just happened to be where the curvature didn't put me in danger. And we know there was. So, and then the Romanians said, "We're not going any further." So then we just called in artillery back from base to where we thought they were. And we knew, and we were right, because then the ICOMs, our Turks, said, "Oh, yeah, we can hear them." They're trying to be brave. Anyway, so, yeah, but we lost. The Afghans tended to lose more. They had international brand big trucks that they would use to move stuff, and we lost. They tended to take more of the beating than our guys did.
Mm-hmm.
Of our 140, we lost one soldier. And we think it was from a Chechen sniper in an engagement. Again, that political thing, our guys be out with the Afghans, and then when they collect up the evidence of when it was over, they'd find ID from the SIS. Is that what the Pakistani intelligence services. They find the IDs from the Pakistan intelligence on those bodies. And so we had one guy in our unit. They called him the tick magnet. Like TIC meaning troops in contact. They called him the tick magnet. They said, anytime Brian Gotti goes out, there's going to be a tick. And anyway, he was tough though. He just retired recently. God bless him. But
well, you guys have both had amazing experiences, and I'm so grateful for the stories you've been able to tell today. I could sit back here and just listen for hours because I become captivated and almost feels like I'm there with you. Amy, I'm there with you as you struggled with a bum shoulder. I can relate to that to the nth degree. And being a single mom while he was gone and all that you had to face with being a caretaker of your own parents who were dear people. And then Paul, being deployed, and not just being deployed, having a life of service to the government of the United States, and imparting of your expertise, which hopefully set the groundwork for many, many successful governments and families across the nation. And so for the both of you, I thank you. And in the last 2 minutes here, I ask all of my guests the same question, which is, what advice can you give now, years later, to someone who's struggling emotionally, mentally, from their traumas to finding a path of light in the future?
one thing we hit on early with you is the marriage thing. I think it's really being a team. We both were impacted in ways that would be, we did a good thing, but we still had a negative impact, right?
Yep.
As being together and working, even though we're both harmed, as it were, leaning and helping each other through that rather than, there were some times Amy got pretty mad at me after I got back, and deservedly so, but the commitment to each other moving forward was always there. So working on that before you go, and then when you come back is why we're still together. We've been committed that way from day one, but we always worked at it. You never stopped dating or courting, even though you're married, right?
Mm.
So the Friday night dates and other things like that to keep you together. So that's the one thing I would say. The other one is reach out. I was the sounding board for a lot of guys.
We missed that about him. There was a line when he came back and we were with the get-together. I looked up and realized that a line was forming in front of me of guys saying, hey, when things were really rough, I knew that Waldron would be cool and calm, and I could go to him. Like, yeah, he does that.
So find the people that will support you, right? And don't be afraid to reach out and get the help. Even if you can't do it in your own service, there's a stigma. We know that. So we got to get the help somewhere. Go get it somewhere. There's people that want to help. And that's, I don't know, anything else? You probably have better stuff than we do.
No.
I will say my last thing for, I did have a few being in the National Guard, of course. I was in the middle of everybody being normal. And then there was me. But with some of the other wives, it was all guys who were in their unit. So left behind, we were women and children. And we did have, when we would get together every now and then, we would have a contest for who lost their cool at the absolute most ridiculous, right? Because you'd be going along and you're like, I got it together. Look, we're fine. Everything's fine. And then, bam, something would happen and you were a lunatic.
Yep.
And I do remember one woman when she said, I thought it was the day I was all put together and I got some chicken out of the freezer to defrost it. And the fact that it wasn't defrosted when I wanted to cook it, she's like, I just started screaming and crying, and I'm like, that's a good one. How about the time, and I'll just finish with, there was a time I was at the elementary school. I did a lot of work in volunteering at the elementary school where the children were. And it was hey, look, it's our baby. Hello, I need your help. This is my Lizzie. She was 5 years old.
Hello, Lizzie.
You need help right now? Well, we got too much. Jack did the dad thing. Okay, give us. We're on it. And what we got? So hold on, I do want to say, so she was in kindergarten at the time, and it was a field day at the elementary school, and I had some responsibilities to get, I don't know, whatever kids here and there, and so I'm holding a clipboard. And suddenly through the crowd, lots of parents there, lots of kids, through the crowd I saw a uniform, just a flash of a uniform. And without a thought going through, a conscious thought going through my head, I froze. My palms are getting sweaty right now. I froze. I stopped breathing, and it felt like I knew that they were coming to tell me that he was gone. They're here. They found me to come and tell me that Paul's gone. And I watched this uniform, the shoulders come through the crowd, coming in my direction, and then walk past me and hug his kids, right? It's just there as a parent. And I grabbed my 1-year-old and had to go around the corner and cry. For I don't know how long it took me, but it took a while, and I'm still not quite over that feeling of, well, here it is. And I did not think that I was worried consciously thinking about that. But I also was at the school when he called me and said, where did you land in the U.S.? Was it Mississippi?
Yeah, down in,
when they were flying home, and I knew when I was following, he was out of country in this time, and he was whatever. And so picked up the phone. Hi, we're in the U.S., and I just sobbed.
I think we stopped at JFK. Yeah,
just sobbed and sobbed.
So can I tell you 10 things?
Let's go help our baby.
Yeah, thank you, Amy.
One, at the elementary school, and it goes with something you said, Michael, that you prompted me. There's a saying from a famous poet, is he serves also who stands and waits. So we actually, at the elementary school, we actually found it's a charter school, found. And so we had a wall of honor with parents who were there. And then we had that quote there, because it's the families that stand and wait. Right? The spouses, so you've got he serves also who stands and wait. Yes, these guys are gone, but the spouses and the families. I'll just tell you a quick story that Amy related to me to, having to do with that trauma. She'd be talking to a woman, for example, in church, and the woman would say, "Oh, I don't know what to do. My husband's gone for 2 weeks to London on a business trip," and she'd just be going, "Oh, okay, how do I do it?" And then she'd have a fight-or-flight reaction.
Yeah.
She literally would think to herself, "Do I punch this woman to make her stop talking, or do I run out of the room?" And she would run, or someone would start to say something over, something. She'd have that 1-year-old and pinch the 1-year-old and start crying so she can get out of there, because they're saying, "Oh, and we feel so bad," and blah blah blah, because Brother Walden's gone, and blah blah blah. Yeah. That your wife had that support, and I'm not saying it was any easier for her especially because of your job.
Yeah. Well, but I appreciate you guys bringing to light that suffering isn't just for the service member going through experiences. It's the family behind, the wife, the kids. They all carry that same scar of service as well in their own way. And for you guys sharing this journey with us today, I sure appreciate it. And I look forward to hearing more about your current role off the video at some point, and and continuing to follow your journey. So, Paul, thank you very much, and thank your dear wife for me as well. This has been wonderful.
Thank you, Michael.